Hello, Sarah. Thank you so much for coming to the Art of Psychiatry today to talk to us on art, Asylum, and the Autobiography. We just wondering whether you can tell us a little bit what sparked your interest in the Bethlehem Hospital to start with.
I suppose my interest in Bethlehem came out of my PhD research, and I was looking specifically at ideas about self-inflicted injury in the late 19th century. And I went into that with quite a lot of assumptions about that asylums of that period was very much about categorising, there was a lot of bureaucracy, and that's where this idea of self-mutilation, as they called it, came from. But I found particularly when looking at those people writing on that topic at Bethlehem Royal Hospital, that actually there was a lot of a wider interest in all sorts of influences, in the influence of the environment, in psychology, in art and writing, and even things like spiritualism. So actually people looking at this category weren't doing so from this deterministic, this is the category. They were actually using it to open up all sorts of other interesting avenues.
So what is it about the Bethlehem that makes it a place where all these changes were happening?
I think Bethlehem was quite different from a lot of other asylums in that period. It had long been a charitable hospital, and that made it quite different from the private madhouses as they were known, that were increasing in number during the 18th century. But it was also very much set apart from the pauper lunatic asylums as they were known. And after 1845, every county in England and Wales had to build a pauper lunatic asylum. And these quickly became larger and larger, and there was kind of less scope for a lot of things to happen in these enormous institutions. Whereas Bethlehem remains relatively small, and also they tended to have a certain amount of choice as the patients who were admitted at Bethlehem. For a long time, Bethlehem had only admitted curable patients, and that generally tended to mean that somebody had been ill for less than a year before they came to the hospital. Or for that particular outbreak, they might have had previous outbreaks of illness before that particular one. So Bethlehem became somewhere that was primarily for acute cases of illness and not chronic cases that tended to be the main clientele in the county asylums. And as the county asylums were growing bigger, there was also a conscious decision to change the approach at Bethlehem, and increasingly began to focus on what the doctors and governors at the time called the educated classes. So Bethlehem very much became a middle-class asylum, focusing on people who couldn't afford to go into private institutions, but who were not entirely paupers. So this meant that partly there were perhaps a few more artists and writers and people from varied backgrounds in Bethlehem, because those tended to be educated but not wealthy. But also it meant that doctors and patients at Bethlehem were from a much similar social background and similar educational background, more so than in other institutions. And I think this actually probably encouraged a much freer discussions between the two. Because Victorian society was heavily class-based, and so between different social classes, it was much less likely to have this free
Interaction,
type of discussion.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, in our group, we're particularly interested in the overlap between art and psychiatry. So I wonder, what role did art play in psychiatry at that time?
Well, art was quite an important occupational pursuit at Bethlehem. So partly this was a kind of pastime, it was something for people to do on the wards, and again this actually related to the class nature of the asylum, because in county asylums a lot of patients would be one could put it as encouraged, one could say forced to work in the laundry or work in the grounds and things like that. But that didn't really happen at Bethlem because it wasn't thought to be appropriate. So lots of the activities that middle class people at that time would carry out in their homes, like reading and writing and drawing, those were the sorts of things that were encouraged at Bethlem. So there was probably a lot more art going on in the wards at Bethlem than in some other asylums. And some of the doctors at Bethlem were also quite keen on collecting this artwork as well. So Theo Hislop, who was the superintendent of the hospital at the turn of the 20th century, he collected large numbers of patient artworks, and in 1900 he organised what's possibly the first exhibition of asylum art anywhere in the world. At Bethlem, and this reportedly had about 600 different patient artworks in this exhibition.
Okay, oh, that's great. Thank you so much for talking to us, Sarah, and we hope to see you again soon.